Hello, souls and demons. For today, I have once again opened the portal next to an earthly ocean. From creepy neighbors to strange places and even stranger experiences, here are some stories for your consumption. So, sit back, grip your seats, and enjoy. First up is Mr. Derengay, written by Cryptic Mummies. My town was definitely weird. Sure, every town has those crazies who smoke pot in the open, with their shirts off in a lawn chair, drink next to them. But Mr. Derengay and his friends were a little different. He was weird. But he was somehow even more batshit insane. Anytime we were caught drinking a beer, ding-dong ditching, or really anything of slight annoyance to his twisted breakfast club, he would chase us around with shotguns or canes, or whatever object that would kill us or not. Mr. Derengay and his friends didn't really seem to age. I still remember him 10 years ago as I do today. Tubby, with a mean look on his face at all times. Though I'm not sure I'd totally know that since his sun hat always covered his eyes. Around the age of 16 or 17, Mr. Derengay would start to eye me more. Not in a creepy way or anything, more of an inspection. Like he hadn't known me my whole life. Like, for example, whenever I took the trash out, there he would be, his head turned my way. It was hard to tell due to the not showing of his eyes, but I was pretty adamant about it. "Oh, he's just a crazy old man," my mom said, who was waving me to go back to my room. My mom was always like that. Really laid back and chill. Though sometimes I feel that could be her biggest weakness. I thought nothing of it for a little bit. I just stopped going outside so much. Since I had a car, I could just sprint in, go do what I needed to, and sneak my way back into the house. And at least if Mr. Derengay was looking at me, I wouldn't know. One day, after coming home from a long Friday at school, I was informed of something I dreaded as soon as I heard it. My mom had told me that I was going to do some housework for Mr. Derengay. I tried to protest, but Mom wouldn't budge. I eventually gave in. I walked to his house as slowly and sluggishly as possible. The first thing I noticed was this was the first time since I had moved here when I was a little kid that he wasn't in his yard smoking. The door was cracked open, so I decided to enter. "Mr. Derengay?" I called out, not really sure how this would start or where he even was. "Joseph," a voice croaked from a room not too far off. Though I had never heard his voice, I could just tell it was him. Something about the raspiness and deepness was creepy. Though if he tried anything, I doubt I would need to defend myself too harshly. When I walked into the room that the noise I heard was from, I saw Mr. Derengay and his 4 friends. They were all in the room. They were all wearing the same thing they always did. It was also the first time I noticed they all wore the same exact clothes. I stepped back. That's when they all charged me, tackling me to the ground. I was trying to squirm out of it or punch them off. I found out the reason they had those sun hats on all the time. Their eyes were completely pitch black. I woke up staring at the house across from me, a beer belly poking out from my once flat stomach, a rolled joint in my right hand, and a sun hat covering my eyes. All right. This next story is called The Farmhouse Basement by Objective Tell 6047. A dark gray sky and a long row of trees greeted me as I drove down the empty dirt road in the countryside. The road, seemingly to stretch on for eternity, kept vanishing in my rearview mirror, along with whatever civilization I did pass. I finally reached a break in the row of trees, broken up by a trail leading to an empty field. Empty, except for the old farmhouse. The old structure stood alone, brown in color against the backdrop of dry grass and naked trees. It showed signs of neglect as no one had lived there for years. The surrounding field was dry and brittle from a lack of rain. While the sky looked ominous and gray, never was there a drop of healing water for the ground, as if all life had left this area. I hated this place more than anything. I was hoping this old farmhouse was demolished, or at least bought out and refurbished. Any reason that I wouldn't have to be here. But there it stood, silent and forgotten. I knew I had to enter. It was the only way to get over my trauma. There was a local legend surrounding that place. The owner's son had committed suicide in the basement. There were many versions as to how and why he did, but the story says his ghost haunts the basement. There were some stories that said if you see him, you will be compelled to kill yourself too. While growing up, us kids started a game, unofficially called the Suicide Game, in which we would dare each other to stay in the basement until we saw the boy's spirit. If we survived for a time, we'd win. If we ran away before the time limit, we'd lose. No one has spent more than 15 minutes down there. I know what you're thinking. And yes, it's a stupid, sick game we came up with. We only came up with it because we lived in a rural area. The nearest town was at least 30 minutes away. We were also too young to drive yet, so we had to make some of our own fun. There were 4 of us one day, including myself, that went to the house one afternoon. The sky looked as much gray or foreboding as it did today. There was only one way to the basement. To the side of the house was a cellar door that no one ever bothered to lock up after abandoning the house. Wouldn't you know it, it had been my turn to go down there to see the basement. I never believed in ghosts, so I had no problem going down there to prove everyone wrong. However, I'd be lying if I didn't say I wasn't a little curious. I descended the old wooden stairs into the dark basement, looking for either a ghost or nothing down there at all. I found neither of these things. My friends had closed the door behind me. There was no light down there except whatever came from the window. The ceiling and corners were covered with spider webs and dust. The basement filled with old boxes, stacked almost ceiling high. I found one open box filled with old comics and sat beside it. It was a bit spooky down there, but not life-threatening. A cool air surrounded me while I sat down there, waiting for I don't know what. That's when I could smell something that seemed out of place. I never experienced the odor until now, but always had it described to me. It was the smell of decomposing flesh. The air was so thick with the foul odor, it stimulated my gag reflex like I could taste it. Where would that smell be coming from in an otherwise empty house? Wherever it was coming from, it was strong, meaning I was awfully close to the decomposing source. In fact, I think it was coming from behind the wall of boxes where I sat. I got up to investigate. All I had to do was turn the corner to see what was making that smell. I looked around the corner, shock stopping me in my tracks as my eyes were processing the gruesome sight before me. She swayed gently in the otherwise stagnant air. Her neck was wrapped around a noose that was tied to a pipe in the ceiling for a makeshift gallows. Her eyes, now gray and dead, stared at a corner in the floor. The visible skin of her face and legs had already become a feasting ground for flies and maggots. I must have stood for several minutes, my mind processing what I was seeing. "Zoe?" I stammered at last to the corpse. "Zoe? Zoe, what the fuck?" I said, shock filling my voice. Zoe had been my classmate and next-door neighbor for as long as I could remember. She had an average, generic face in the crowd that only I would recognize. She would otherwise be unnoticeable, if it weren't for the constant bullying she faced from her peers. They were cruel in what they did to her, and I was never aware of it. Whenever we walked home from school, I would see a look of sadness and exhaustion, practically on the verge of tears. Then there was one day when the kids played a practically cruel joke. Zoe had a crush on me, and they wanted me to be alone with her so she could tell me. I got her alone behind the school so we could talk. She did tell me how she felt and even went up to kiss me. I didn't know how to handle the situation, but I told her that I didn't feel the same way, but we'd always be friends. I bet she felt like the whole world crashed around her. What's worse was that the bullies were filming our interaction. They had laughed at her and taunted her over the exchange. She walked home defeated. I didn't see her for 4 days after that. I texted her all night without any reply and, even unsuccessfully, went to her house to check on her. This place, as it turns out, was where she had been. I had been screaming and shouting at the unresponsive corpse when my friends came down to see me. When they saw Zoe dangling by her neck, they likewise screamed at the grisly scene. I don't know how we got out. I don't know who called 911, but after taking their sweet time getting here, an ambulance and a police car showed up. We were questioned about it, though I was too out of it to answer anything. My parents were notified and they came and got me. While driving away, I looked back to see a medical team rolling my dead friend out in a gurney and a body bag. My parents, understanding that I'd been traumatized about the sight, moved out of the town and as far away from the farmhouse as we could get. I didn't adjust well as an adult after that. I got into a new school during my junior year, and I had trouble making new friends. I was both the kid who was quiet and kept to himself, and the first to start fights regularly. I'm ashamed to say that I caused a lot of stress for my parents. I got into a bad crowd that did nothing but heavy drinking and even heavier drug use. I dropped out after my junior year and continued drinking and using. I got busted a couple of times for underage drinking and possession until I got arrested for a DUI at the age of 22. I got off since it was my first offense as an adult, with the condition I do community service and attend mandatory counseling. My court-mandated therapist asked me about my childhood, and I told him about seeing my dead friend in an old house. She was very sympathetic and officially diagnosed me with post-traumatic stress disorder and suffering from a guilt complex. We went through various techniques for relief, but in the end, she told me what I would have to do is go back to the spot where my trauma began and confront what I saw. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to go back into that basement. But I suppose for everyone I had to go back. Now I'm here, not wanting to go in there, but also not wanting to put everyone through my problems anymore. I walked further into the house, the structure being in a larger state of neglect than when I was last here. I'm sure if anyone went inside, they would fall through the floor. Only one way to the basement, I remembered. The latch was still open, presumably from the last group of kids who went down there, or even from the last time I went there myself. Inside, a new thick layer of dust and cobwebs had accumulated in the basement. A new patchwork of spiderwebs had covered the opening, which I stepped through, the sticky strands attaching to my face. The basement was just as dark as ever, with only a little light coming through the glass. The boxes suffered from water damage and collapsing under their own weight. I walked to the spot where I found Zoe hanging by her neck. This time, nothing was there. There was no body. There were no ghosts, except the ones in my own mind. The image replayed in my mind over and over. I started hearing a faint ringtone going off. I had checked my phone to see if anyone was calling me, but I realized the noise was coming from behind me. I looked around to see a small light on the floor. I walked toward it and reached for an old cell phone, the screen saying, "Unknown caller." I answered it. The reply sounded like a female choking on something. I hung up, only for the phone to ring again as "Unknown caller." I hesitantly answered again. The same choking sound replied to me. I didn't bother hanging up, instead throwing the old phone to the ground. The choking sound still stung in the air. I looked at the darkness before me and could notice a slight swaying in the shadows. I took my phone to turn the flashlight app on and saw a hanging noose right before me. It gave the most subtle of movements as it hung there, empty, but waiting for someone to fill its empty hole. This couldn't have been the same one, as it looked so new. I detected more movement in the corner of my eye. I switched over to the corner and saw her face. Zoe stood there, silent and facing me. Her face gray from a lack of blood flow into her veins. Her eyes, still dead, had bored into me like a pair of drills. The air around her had grown icy cold as death itself. My dead friend had motioned toward the empty noose. I knew what she was telling me. Something I tried to put out of my mind. But what my guilt had always told me. I should have died here a long time ago. All right, our third and final story tonight is titled, I Relive Every Day Multiple Times. Today I stayed up past 12 a.m. by Cryptic Mummies. I've always gone to bed fairly early, usually around 11:30 p.m. I live a normal life. I go to school, I'm a high school student, I talk to girls, I get decent enough grades. 2 parents. I watch questionable things when I'm alone, and I just generally have a good life. Except for one thing. I relive every day. It's completely sporadic. Sometimes I'll relive a day 4 times, sometimes 2. The worst one was 10. That was the day my dog died. Watching the life leave his eyes 10 times was heartbreaking. I've never told anyone this because I doubt anyone would believe me. Most Disney movies or whatever would make this out to be dope as hell. If you fuck up in traffic, boom, fixed. If you get beaten up, the next day you're ready and can get the jump on them instead. But then there's the days you don't want to relive, or are just painfully dull days. The first time this happened to me was at the age of, I'd say, about 13. I was old enough to know what was going on, kind of fast, I guess. My grandpa had just died. There was always something weird about him. He always hated me. Always. Thought I was annoying. I thought. I remember walking into my painfully average middle school, watching kids put the finishing touches on some assignment they had half-assed the previous night. Something I'd seen yesterday as soon as I walked in, though I thought nothing of it. That's when my best friend walked up. His name was Joey. He was wearing the same thing as yesterday. The only reason I remember this was because of a giant red stain on his upper chest, near his heart. "Weren't you wearing that shirt yesterday?" I asked as I checked my phone, seeing no notifications. "Nah, yesterday was Sunday," he said, giving me the crazy look. I chalked it up to deja vu. It happens all the time. A pretty drastic case, but you know, whatever. School's the worst one. I have to learn everything 4 to 9 times over with no way of preventing it. Though I usually just skip day 1, it does help me with tests, not surprising though. Anyways, I had been slacking this particular 28-day-long week. Skipping almost every class, texting, going to the bathroom the whole class, you name it. But that's when I realized that it was the 4th day in the cycle. The day the cycle breaks and a new one begins. Usually. This wasn't good. I took every book I could fit in my locker, arms and ass, if that was possible, and sprinted home as soon as that bell rang, dismissing us all. I was studying for hours and hours, and around 6 p.m. I ate dinner with my parents. Something big, that's all I remember. Well, when I got back to my room, I stared at my desk and then at my bed, which looked 1,000,000 times more comfortable now. Shit, I gave in. I fell asleep. Deep sleep for sure. Surprised a prince didn't have to come and get me or something. When I woke up, it was 11. I proceeded to spend the next hour studying. Right when I closed my computer, I noticed it was 11:59. I had a terrible cold feeling when I saw the numbers change, and that's when I blacked out. When I woke up, it felt like I was being propelled upwards. I arose and looked around. A completely black room with 2 white chairs. I was right behind one, and the other one had a man in a nicely tailored white suit. He was tall from what I could tell. He had long curly hair that went to his shoulders and a cigarette in his mouth. "Well, sit down already, mate, damn." A thick British accent as well. I started, but he put a hand up. "You finally won my game. I'm so happy for you. It only took you a mere 5 years. Anyways, it was very enjoyable watching you screw up time and again." He crossed his legs. "Game?" I asked, totally stupid. "Yes, my game. Here are the rules. I picked one person to relive multiple days, thousands of years ago. Then, they make a choice to whoever they want to go next. It's usually someone different from each bloodline, and if they don't make the choice, I kill them and pick someone at random. But damn, your grandpa sure did hate you," he said, clasping his hands together in enjoyment. "He picked this for me?" I asked again stupidly. Are you Satan?" "You could say that, man. Closest thing, really. I was actually the first person to relive the days. Don't know who picked that out for me. I evolved with the times when Neanderthals went extinct. I became a naked Homo sapien instead. And now, well, I'm a modern human. Crazy how it works, isn't it?" I had so many questions, but I had to ask this one. "What do you truly look like?" I asked. "You couldn't comprehend it," he said, waving his hand. "But we're dragging this out for way too long. Who do you want to curse, huh? Come on. There's gotta be someone you hate." "No, I'm not gonna do that. I curse you," I said, suddenly feeling some unknown bravery that was deep inside me for the last 18 years or something. He grinned, laughed, snapped his fingers, and here I am. Writing this in the bathroom of the Humanoid Factory Company. Location: East Hell.